All right, hello everyone. It's now 2 o'clock, so we'll start the webinar. My name is Ditte Steffensen, and I am Preferred by Nature Sourcing Hub Manager. I hope I'm going through loud and clear. Today's webinar will be on Brazilian timber legality risk and the EU Deforestation Regulation. And as most of you know, complying with the EUDR will require sourcing both deforestation-free, but also complying with the regulation of the country. So this is why we have the focus today on timber legality and the EUDR. The first part of the webinar will be on the EUDR requirements, and it will be presented by my colleague, Ivan Bermejo Barbier from Preferred by Nature. And the second part of the webinar will then focus on the timber legality risks and will be presented by Emma Flora, Marco Stentini. And he'll be presenting the result of the risk assessment, which was jointly developed by Preferred by Nature and Emma Flora. And with these few words, I will give the microphone to Ivan. All right.
Well, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us in today's session, combined session on both the EUDR and the timber legality risk assessment for Brazil. I'm Ivan Bermejo, working in the sustainability specialist within the Tailored Service Division, and I'll be conducting this first part of the webinar on the EUDR. First of all, just to remind all of you that this presentation is conducted as part of the Life Legal Wood project, which is funded by the European Union's LIFE program. The project focuses mainly on strengthening the implementation of the EU timber regulation, but for obvious reasons, it is including within its scope the first implementing part of the EU Deforestation Regulation. The project is implemented by Preferred by Nature in collaboration with a consortium of 13 organizations in total, which you can see at the bottom of this slide. Well, I believe many of you already know Preferred by Nature, so I will just give the briefest of the introductions as to who we are. Preferred by Nature is we are a Danish-based non-governmental organization, and we engage in activities mostly to support responsible production and responsible sourcing of timber and agricultural products. We are now 25 years old and work on emission-related activities in more than 100 countries now, with offices and staff in more than 30 countries worldwide. We are running different programs, we acting as a certification body for a number of certification schemes dealing with both the forest and the agricultural sectors, and we also provide tailored services and training to organizations. As some practical information with regards to this webinar, just remind that it will be recorded, and both the recorded presentation and the presentation slides that we'll be using will be made available after the webinar. However, we will only publish the recording of the presentation, not what will be discussed in the Q&A session. Questions or comments made by participants through the Q&A function during the webinar also will not be made public after the webinar. And just as a final piece of practical information, please, in case you might have any technical issue with accessing Zoom or any of its functionalities, please contact our colleague Julie via the email you see in the screen, or maybe it's a quick message in the chat. Again, all attendees are in listen-only mode, and you are encouraged to ask questions in writing using the Q&A function that you will see in the bottom of your screen during the webinar. yeah, so this is the way that, so that we can address the questions and use them in the Q&A session at the end. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible during that last Q&A session, which will take place after the two presentations. Just in order to remind you of some of the updates that we are running from Prefer by Nature, we have these 3 websites that you are encouraged also to consult. One is the dedicated website, our eutr.info, where you can find the latest news and you can access different tools and reference documents developed during the project. You can also visit Prefer by Nature's Sourcing Hub, which is a resource for tools and holding country-level risk information for both timber and other forest risk commodities. And we are in the process of updating our Sourcing Hub to provide detailed risk guidance on a much wider set of risk indicators, so that it is aligned with the new EU Deforestation Regulation. And also you can subscribe to our Sourcing Hub newsletter in order to receive updates that will be sent directly to your email inbox on different aspects of the regulations and legality in general. And with this, we can now start with presenting the requirements of the EUDR. It's just basically the main objective of the regulation is basically to minimize the consumption of products that result from deforestation and forest degradation, and also minimizing the consumption of products that do not comply with a broad set of legality criteria that have not been harvested in accordance to all the legal procedures that take place in the country of origin. The analysis that brought the EU to actually develop this regulation is based on the role that a set of commodities play as drivers for global deforestation and forest degradation. The very text of the regulation itself recognizes that the EU is an important consumer region for these kind of forest risk commodities. And also the regulation expresses its concern that deforestation and forest degradation are occurring at an alarming rate, aggravating both climate change and the loss of biodiversity. The regulation is part of the European Green Deal in order to reduce its contribution to deforestation. And of course, it is well known that the expansion of agricultural land to produce commodities such as cattle, wood, palm oil, soy, and other commodities included in the regulation actually are critical drivers of deforestation and forest degradation. I'll start presenting some information on the development, the process, and the updated status of the regulation today. So the proposal was first issued by the Commission on November 2021. And during the last 2 years, the trialogue process between the Commission, the Parliament, and the Council took place. And just on last December the 6th, 2022, a final text was approved and adopted by Parliament and Council this year in April and May. So that recently on the 9th of June, it was published in the official journal, and the date you have there for entering into force, which is on the 29th of June, 2023, which is exactly today in a week. So next week, EUDR will enter into force. As for the timelines for actual implementation of the regulation, it's important that once the regulation enters into force next week, businesses will have 18 months for preparations before the regulation actually becomes applicable. So that's on the 30th of December in 2024. There's only a small exception for micro and small operators that were established before the December 21st, 2020, and that actually are not trading with products included in the current EU timber regulation. So for those companies, like you can think of maybe companies dealing with mostly with the agricultural sector, these companies will have an extension of 6 months in order to start having been applicable for them to be subject to the regulation. So the companies will have 18 months, and that may sound like a long time, but it's only, in fact, and out of our experience with how was the implementation process with the EU timber regulation, we all know that this will actually be a very short period of time, and therefore a lot of work has to be done and has to start now. This is basically what will be required for the EU-based companies once the regulation becomes applicable in 18 months. Basically, companies will be required to have a fully functioning and fully compliant due diligence system in order to avoid what the regulation calls relevant products, which is products included in the annex of the regulation, so that these products are not associated with deforestation, are not associated with forest degradation, and are not legal, and they don't fall into legal non-compliance during the process of production. So this is why it is also important to strengthen the collaboration between both the EU and the Brazilian companies in this occasion, to ensure that the flow of information between importers, manufacturers, traders, retailers in the EU market can address all these requirements and obligations in the 18 months that we have. As an overview of the key components of the regulation, we would have first, as for economic operators, we will have these key components 1 and 2, where 1 is basically the prohibition to placing and exporting these products from the EU market, and these products being products that contain or have been made using relevant commodities. So ensuring that these products are not deforestation free, and that they have not been produced, and that avoiding that these products have not been produced in accordance with the relevant legislation. Also, as a key component number 3, we have the requirements on businesses. As number 3, number 2 would be the due diligence obligation. That would be the second key component for economic operators. So operators will have to exercise due diligence on their supply chains to ensure that they properly address risk for deforestation and the production according to legality. And then as for member states, we will have the series of obligations to ensure the actual enforcement of and implementation of the regulation. And as a key component number 4, we will have what the regulation calls the information system, which will allow for processing all the information submitted by the operators and traders during the process. This is also for all of you who know about the EU timber regulation. This element of the information system is a very important addition in this regulation. So in this presentation, we'll mostly focus on addressing key components 1 and 2, which are the ones that affect the economic operators, the companies. So what are the commodities and products that are in the scope with the regulation? The following 7 commodities, the one you see on the slide, have been included in the scope of the regulation. These are wood, beef, cattle, palm oil, soy, cocoa, coffee, and rubber. And in addition to these commodities, A full list of derived products from them is included in the annex. So we would have, for example, that from cattle as commodity, we would have leather and other leather products. And for cocoa as commodity, we would have chocolate products, for example, included in the annex. All the products in the scope are included in this Annex 1 of the regulation, and they use in the combined nomenclature, which is the one handled by customs for import and export procedures. And this is the very first place where we as companies, where we must check if our products and therefore our companies will be affected, will be in the scope of the regulation. So this is again to remind you that not all products derived from these commodities are included in the annex. These 7 commodities, as we mentioned before, are considered by the EU to have the highest importance, and they have the highest impact in relation to deforestation risk and forest degradation. But it is important for you also to know that this list will be reviewed. I think that it is already included in the articles of the regulation. It will be reviewed, and we'll surely see maybe new commodities and new products included in the scope in the near future. In the case of wood products, the scope is actually an expanded version of what we have in Annex 1 of the current EU timber regulation. And so this version in the EUDR for wood products actually has added printed paper, has added wood fiber and printed materials, charcoal products, tools, wood flour, coffins, all types of seeds. These are some of the wood products that are not included in the UTR and will be included in the EUDR, are already included in the annex. Again, aligned with the current EUTR version, the approach for waste and packing material is still the same. So that waste material will be considered exempt from the regulation, but companies will have to prove that that material is actually waste in compliance with the directive that you see in the screen. And again, for packing material, which could be the wood material or it could be paper packaging material, it's important to know that when used as packing material in support of the product, it is considered exempt from the regulation. Now let's see quickly what are the main actors with obligations described in the regulation. As for the 4 main actors, and playing different roles, we have first the European Commission. It's basically the European Commission defines, has developed the regulation, and it will be involved in issuing delegated acts and further guidelines in order to clarify some of the areas that still need to be clarified. The EU Commission will also ensure that member states will implement their obligations and will also coordinate information sharing between different member states and competent authorities. And will also be responsible for developing the information system and the interface that will be created in order to link the information, what information is held in the information system with the customs authorities. As a second actor, we have the member states, which play a very important role in the regulation, so that each member state will designate its competent authority or authorities responsible for the overall enforcement of the regulation. Where these competent authorities will then carry out the checks on operators and will develop detailed rules on penalties within their jurisdictions. So the sanctions will be defined at national level by member states. As the third element, we will have the customs authorities, which will play a very important role. like right now, they are not included in the EU TR as an active actor in the process of, for example, importing or exporting. But now they will play a larger role, and they will have access to the information related to operators, due diligence, etc. So they shall control the correct declaration of relevant products within the scope of the regulation, entering or leaving the EU market. And then as the last actor in the regulation, we'll have the economic operators within the private sector, which are basically classified as operators and traders, that we'll see in a minute, with the main obligations of the operators being the two ones that you can see in the slide, which is basically the prohibition for placing on exporting from the EU market non-compliant products, and also to conduct due diligence. So now, who are the main actors within the private sector? Let's get into what are the operators and what are the traders. Operators are organizations that place relevant products for the first time on the EU market or export from the EU market. Okay? So either place or export. Again, the export is a significant change from the EU TR, where only placing, getting into the EU market was considered. And just for explaining, like when we talk about placing products on the EU market, just to inform that like there's different ways that products can be placed on the EU market. They can be placed either by importing, they can be placed by harvesting local commodities, so timber harvested within the EU, that's also included within the EUDR. It's considered as being placed on the EU market. And also processing or manufacturing companies that use some inputs to produce some new products. Well, those products are also considered to be products placed on the market for the first time. So those three instances would be instances of placing products in the market that operators engage with. And just to remind also, like, that like the obligations and the operators, in the case of importers, it is the importers who are the first link with obligations within the EUDR, okay? Exporting companies, let's say exporting companies from Brazil, they are not subject to the regulation, they are not in a scope, and have no obligations or responsibilities towards the EU authorities, only for the EU-based importers and downstream. As for traders, which is the second type of operator, or the second type of company included in the regulation, these are businesses which basically just buy and sell products that have already been placed on the EU market, and they don't do any processing or transformation in the products. So this could be basically, we could think of wholesalers or retailers, just companies that buy and sell. So what are the obligations of these two types of companies? Operators will be the companies really having more obligations and bearing the weight of their responsibilities. First of all, they are the ones subject to the obligation of the prohibition to place on the EU market or export from the EU market non-compliant products, with non-compliant being that they are not deforestation free or that they have not been produced in accordance with the relevant legislation. They also have to exercise due diligence through a system and procedures that they will have to develop and implement effectively. And finally, all the products placed on the market or exported must be covered by a due diligence statement, which accompanies the import or export of the product. And that will be used also for import or it will be used in combination with customs for proceeding to release for circulation in case of imports and for the procedure for exporting. So DDS or due diligence statements will have to be submitted to competent authorities when importing, when harvesting in the European Union, and when processing into new products, as we saw before for the 3 examples of placing products on the market. Just to mention also that SME operators, which are, let's say, small operators, micro, small and medium operators, will have some of these obligations reduced, especially when dealing with products that have already undergone due diligence by a previous operator in the supply chain. As for traders, they have much lesser responsibilities because their obligations are mostly to keep information. This is very similar to what the EU TR has at the moment for traders. So they have to keep information about the direct suppliers and the customers that they supply products to in order to make traceability of products subject to the regulation easier. So they must collect and keep information, they must keep their records for at least 5 years, and they have to provide information to competent authorities upon request. Important to mention that they could also be subject to controls or checks by the competent authorities. However, and this is again a very important difference with the EU TR, traders which are not SMEs, so traders that have in general above 250 employees and sets over 40 million euros, these traders, because of their size and the importance of the business that they have, they will be required to meet the exact same obligations as non-SME operators. So we were to go back to the previous slide and see all these obligations from the operators. Non-SME traders will have all these obligations that non-SME operators have. This is important to consider. So now getting into the requirements of what are compliant products and being the first element, the deforestation-free requirement. So what is deforestation-free? So basically, there's very important definitions here in the regulation that have wide-ranging implications for operators, as well as for the supply chains that they're sourcing through. In Article 3 of the regulation, that requires that all products have to be deforestation-free, and this is explained by this affects to products that have been produced in land that has not been subject to deforestation after December 31st, 2020. So in order to ensure that the product has not resulted from deforestation, we have to show evidence that the forest area where it has been obtained has not been deforested using this cut-off date of December 31st, 2020 as the reference. This deforestation is in the regulation is actually considered as the conversion of forest to agricultural use only, whether human-induced or not, and whether legal or not. This is important to consider also that deforestation is only as the conversion from forest to agricultural use. So maybe other land use changes from forest to maybe infrastructure building or urbanization, they would not be considered as deforestation within this definition used by the EUDR. And also important to remember that the forest definition is the FAO definition, which means that it's wooded area with above 10% canopy cover. So these are the two definitions, both for forest and for deforestation, that are very important to consider in the analysis. And then also only for wood products, the regulation demands that products also cannot result from forest degradation with the same cut-off date. So we have to ensure that wood products do not origin in forest areas where forest degradation has occurred as of December 31st, 2020. This requirement of deforestation free is it's a significant change in relation to the EUTR, because EUTR only demanded that illegal deforestation didn't occur, and now within EUDR, deforestation and forest degradations are not allowed, regardless they are legal or not. So now, with EUDR in place, legal deforestation will not be allowed for products that enter the EU or are exported from the EU. Getting into some of the nuances and details of what the EUDR considers as forest degradation, it's important that the regulation uses the FAO definitions for the different categories of forests. So this would be the conversions that the EUDR is considering forest degradation, and therefore they will be not allowed in these products. So basically, we can see that it's considered as forest degradation the conversion of the highest biodiversity categories of forests, primary and naturally regenerated forests, into maybe the lesser or the categories of forests with less canopy cover or less biodiversity values. And also this conversion from primary to planted forests will also not be allowed, because they will be considered as forest degradation. However, as you can see in the slide, these are not all the options that we could think of for conversion. So this leaves room for some other conversions that would not be covered by the EUDR, and these are also important to consider. So primary into naturally regenerated forests, for example, would not be considered as forest degradation. Naturally regenerated into planted would not be considered, etc. And again, these are important elements to consider. And also these other conversions from down going upwards are not currently considered as forest degradation or conversion that would not be allowed for products. So, for example, as the text reads now, conversion from Cerrado in Brazil into plantation forest could be allowed, for example. But again, these are elements that could be changed in the future, and they are actually under review. And the third element that we have to ensure in order to deem a product in compliance is the legality. So commodities must have been legally produced in addition to not being associated with deforestation and forest degradation. So within the EUDR, these 8 broad categories of legislation that you see in the slide will have to be evaluated in order to deem a product legally compliant. And in yellow, you can see some of the new legal categories that have been added in relation to the actual EU timber regulation. So again, like other regulations in the EU, the EUDR avoids being very prescriptive, as in naming specific laws or types of law. They just rather they have outlined these 8 broad buckets of categories of legislation, and it will be up to companies within their due diligence systems to actually decide on how to approach these this analysis. So as we said, like important to mention that labor rights, human rights, the principle of free, prior and informed consent, rights of indigenous peoples, all these are new elements of legality that will have to be considered and that were not included in the EUTR. As for the due diligence obligations, this is the key element for operators to develop a due diligence system. Operators and non-SME traders will have due diligence obligations. And these due diligence requirements follow the basic steps that follow any other company due diligence system and follow the same structure as it is in the EUTR right now, with collecting of information, risk assessment, and risk mitigation. Just again, as differences towards the EUTR, it's important to mention that all this due diligence process will have to take place prior to placing products on the market or before exporting them, because operators will have to exercise due diligence with regards to all relevant commodities that they're using within their products. So these changes, again, as I said, that the main difference is that this will have to happen beforehand, because it's actually that before importing or before placing on the market, before exporting, companies will have to submit a due diligence statement using the central system that we mentioned before. And that due diligence statement will basically include the basic information, and it will include the company's self-declaration that it has conducted risk assessment and has concluded that no or negligible risk for placing or exporting has taken place. As for the first part of the due diligence, which is the gathering information, this again follows the same structure as it is currently in the EUTR. With operators will have to collect information, documents, and data that can demonstrate that the relevant products are deforestation-free, that these products have been produced in accordance with the relevant legislation, and this step includes the collection of different types of information with the purpose of informing the next step of the due diligence, which is the risk assessment. So all this gathering information is in order to conduct a robust risk assessment. So information that had to be collected by operators would be, as you can see in the slide, well, basic description of product, quantity, country of production and harvest. And important, as you can see at the very last two, are the collecting the verifiable evidence that indicates or demonstrates that the relevant commodities or products are deforestation-free, and the same kind of evidence, verifiable evidence, the regulation says, in order to ensure that the commodities or products are in compliance with all the legislation. Important element for the information part is that geolocation and date or time range of production will also have to be collected. And this will apply to all supply chains, regardless of the level of risk of the countries, as we'll see afterwards, that depending on the level of risk of the countries, there will be different ways of approaching this due diligence process. In terms of the geolocation, important to mention that information on all the plots of land will have to be collected, and this information will be different according to the size of those plots. So for plots being less than 4 hectares, it will be enough with just 1 point, maybe the centroid of the polygon. But for areas bigger than 4 hectares, the whole information on the perimeter of the polygon will have to be gathered in order to submit a due diligence statement. In step 2 of the due diligence process, which is the risk assessment, Article 10 in the regulation requires that operators evaluate different types of risks. As we said, mostly risks associated with raw materials sourced from deforestation-free and raw materials that have not been produced in accordance with the relevant legislation. And also important, this risk assessment will have to cover that there's low risk in the supply chain of mixing of products with different risk profiles. So maybe products being manufactured in low-risk countries, we'll have to consider the possibility of other material coming or originating in high-risk countries to be mixed. Also provides with some specific criteria that the risk assessment shall take into consideration. And these are some of them with like the presence of forests, obviously, has to be taken in consideration. The prevalence of deforestation or forest degradation in the country, concerns that may be known in relation to the country of production and origin in terms of level of corruption, prevalence of document and data falsification, lack of law enforcement, armed conflict, and well, some other elements. The complexity of the relevant supply chain has also been considered, and the risk of, as we mentioned before, the risk of mixing with products of unknown origin or produced in areas where deforestation or forest degradation has occurred. And again, substantiated concerns that may be raised by particulars to the competent authorities. Should these appear, they have to be included in the risk assessment. As we mentioned, there is a provision in the EUDR for establishing a benchmark, a country benchmarking, where all the countries in the world will eventually be classified using these 3 categories: high, standard, and low. So this categorization is still to be developed by the EU Commission. So it is expected to be in place by December 2024. But so far, all the countries are considered standard risk by default. And just when this list is published, all countries having low risk will be able to use a different process called a simplified due diligence, where companies will only be obliged to conduct the first part of the due diligence. This is only the gathering of information. So for products originating in low-risk countries, no risk assessment and therefore no risk mitigation will have to take place within the due diligence. And as for the step 3 of the due diligence, if negligible risk is not concluded in step 2, then there's some risk that have to be mitigated, and this has to be approached by operators, which will have to have in place controls and procedures to mitigate and manage these risks. And all this will have to be done prior to placing on the market or exporting. So all these risks have to be mitigated prior to submitting the due diligence statement that allows operators to place or export. Important also to mention here just that certification, if we think of timber and FSC or PEFC certification, will not be considered as direct compliance with the regulation as it stands now for the EUTR, but we will play a very important role in this part of the due diligence, in the risk mitigation, as certified products will certainly be considered as compliance, as being used, as using a risk mitigation procedure by being certified. And then now just in relation, a few comments in relation to the trade between maybe Brazil and the EU. Just to remind you that traceability will surely be one of the biggest challenges, especially for supply chains involving smallholders and our companies lacking the resources to implement technology and procedures. A clear understanding of supply chain back to the forest, back to the plot of land, which is the geolocation requirement. That will be another challenge, and ensuring that the information for plot of origin is actually robust and that is verified. It's important also to consider that there are different risks for different types of forests, and this will also be mentioned by Irma Flora afterwards in the presentation of the risk assessment for Brazil. Communications with the importers and trade partners will be key in order to keep all the due diligence system well oiled. Also being able to provide verifiable evidence of legal compliance and deforestation free, using maybe satellite mapping or any other tools, will also require significant resources, and it will require collaboration between economic operators along the supply chain. And finally, the regulation also includes a number of sanctions and penalties that, as we said before, they will only be applicable to European companies. However, exporters, so since exporters from, let's say, Brazil, for example, are not subject to the regulation, it is very likely that importers will include clauses in contracts as maybe as safeguards in case of non-compliance that could arise once the products enter the EU market, in order to to get some amendments or satisfaction with their suppliers. So with that, I think I will hand over to Marco Lentini and on the risk assessment for Brazil, and after that we'll have the Q&A session. So please, you are all welcome to write your questions in the Q&A chat, and we'll try to address them at the end of the webinar. Thank you very much.